Hello and welcome to Being Prodigy. Now put on your headphones and start learning. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description.
The French put these uprisings down with great severity, even using planes to bomb demonstrators. In February 1930, Ho Chi Minh brought together competing nationalist groups to establish the Vietnamese Communist, Vietnam Cong San Dang, Party, later renamed the Indochinese Communist Party. He was inspired by the militant demonstrations of the European Communist parties. In 1940, Japan occupied Vietnam as part of its imperial drive to control Southeast Asia, so nationalists now had to fight against the Japanese as well as the French. The League for the Independence of Vietnam, Vietnam Doc Lap Duong Minh, which came to be known as the Viet Minh, fought the Japanese occupation and recaptured Hanoi in September 1945. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam was formed and Ho Chi Minh became chairman. The new Republic of Vietnam. The new republic faced a number of challenges. The French tried to regain control by using the Emperor, Bao Dai, as their puppet. Faced with the French offensive, the Viet Minh were forced to retreat to the hills. After 8 years of fighting, the French were defeated in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. The supreme French commander of the French armies, General Henri Navarre, had declared confidently in 1953 that they would soon be victorious. But on May 7, 1954, the Viet Minh annihilated and captured more than 16,000 soldiers of the French Expeditionary Corps. The entire commanding staff, including a general, 16 colonels and 1,749 officers, were taken prisoner. In the peace negotiations in Geneva that followed the French defeat, the Vietnamese were persuaded to accept the division of the country. North and South were split. Ho Chi Minh and the Communists took power in the north while Bao Dai's regime was put in power in the south. This division set in motion a series of events that turned Vietnam into a battlefield, bringing death and destruction to its people as well as the environment. The Bao Dai regime was soon overthrown by a coup led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Diem built a repressive and authoritarian government. Anyone who opposed him was called a communist and was jailed and killed. Diem retained Ordinance 10, a French law that permitted Christianity but outlawed Buddhism.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
His dictatorial rule came to be opposed by a broad opposition united under the banner of the National Liberation Front, NLF. With the help of the Ho Chi Minh government in the north, the NLF fought for the unification of the country. The U.S. watched this alliance with fear. Worried about communists gaining power, it decided to intervene decisively, sending in troops and arms. The entry of the U.S. into the war. U.S. entry into the war marked a new phase that proved costly to the Vietnamese as well as to the Americans. From 1965 to 1972, over 3,403,100 U.S. services personnel served in Vietnam. 7,484 were women. Even though the U.S. had advanced technology and good medical supplies, casualties were high. About 47,244 died in battle and 303,704 were wounded. Of those wounded, 23,014 were listed by the Veterans Administration to be 100% disabled. This phase of struggle with the U.S. was brutal. Thousands of U.S. troops arrived equipped with heavy weapons and tanks and backed by the most powerful bombers of the time, B-52s. The widespread attacks and use of chemical weapons, napalm, Agent Orange, and phosphorus bombs destroyed many villages and decimated jungles. Civilians died in large numbers. The effect of the war was felt within the U.S. as well. Many were critical of the government for getting involved in a war that they saw as indefensible. When the youth were drafted for the war, the anger spread. Compulsory service in the armed forces, however, could be waived for university graduates. This meant that many of those sent to fight did not belong to the privileged elite but were minorities and children of working-class families. The U.S. media and films played a major role in both supporting as well as criticizing the war. Hollywood made films in support of the war, such as John Wayne's Green Berets, 1968. This has been cited by many as an example of an unthinking propaganda film that was responsible for motivating many young men to die in the war. Other films were more critical as they tried to understand the reasons for this war. Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979, reflected the moral confusion that the war had caused in the U.S.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
The war grew out of a fear among U.S. policy planners that the victory of the Ho Chi Minh government would start a domino effect. Communist governments would be established in other countries in the area. They underestimated the power of nationalism to move people to action, inspire them to sacrifice their home and family, live under horrific conditions, and fight for independence. They underestimated the power of a small country to fight the most technologically advanced country in the world. The Ho Chi Minh Trail. The story of the Ho Chi Minh Trail is one way of understanding the nature of the war that the Vietnamese fought against the U.S. It symbolizes how the Vietnamese used their limited resources to great advantage. The trail, an immense network of footpaths and roads, was used to transport men and materials from the north to the south. The trail was improved from the late 1950s, and from 1967 about 20,000 North Vietnamese troops came south each month on this trail. The trail had support bases and hospitals along the way. In some parts supplies were transported in trucks, but mostly they were carried by porters, who were mainly women. These porters carried about 25 kilos on their backs, or about 70 kilos on their bicycles. Most of the trail was outside Vietnam and neighboring Laos and Cambodia, with branch lines extending into South Vietnam. The U.S. regularly bombed this trail trying to disrupt supplies, but efforts to destroy this important supply line by intensive bombing failed because they were rebuilt very quickly. The nation and its heroes. Another way of looking at social movements is to see how they affect different groups in society. Let us see how the roles of women were specified in the anti-imperialist movement in Vietnam, and what that tells us about nationalist ideology. Women as rebels. Women in Vietnam traditionally enjoyed greater equality than in China, particularly among the lower classes, but they had only limited freedom to determine their future and played no role in public life.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
As the nationalist movement grew, the status of women came to be questioned and a new image of womanhood emerged. Writers and political thinkers began idealizing women who rebelled against social norms. In the 1930s, a famous novel by Not Lin caused a scandal because it showed a woman leaving a forced marriage and marrying someone of her choice, someone who was involved in nationalist politics. This rebellion against social conventions marked the arrival of the new woman in Vietnamese society. Heroes of past times. Rebel women of the past were similarly celebrated. In 1913, the nationalist fanboy Chow wrote a play based on the lives of the Trung sisters who had fought against Chinese domination in 3943 CE. In this play he depicted these sisters as patriots fighting to save the Vietnamese nation from the Chinese. The actual reasons for the revolt are a matter of debate among scholars, but after fans' play the Trung sisters came to be idealized and glorified. They were depicted in paintings, plays and novels as representing the indomitable will and the intense patriotism of the Vietnamese. We are told that they gathered a force of over 30,000, resisted the Chinese for 2 years, and when ultimately defeated, they committed suicide, instead of surrendering to the enemy. Other women rebels of the past were part of the popular nationalist lore. One of the most venerated was Chi, who lived in the 3rd century CE. Orphaned in childhood, she lived with her brother. On growing up she left home, went into the jungles, organized a large army and resisted Chinese rule. Finally, when her army was crushed, she drowned herself. She became a sacred figure, not just a martyr who fought for the honor of the country. Nationalists popularized her image to inspire people to action. Women as warriors. In the 1960s, photographs in magazines and journals showed women as brave fighters. There were pictures of women militia shooting down planes. They were portrayed as young, brave and dedicated. Stories were written to show how happy they felt when they joined the army and could carry a rifle. Some stories spoke of their incredible bravery in single-handedly killing the enemy when Thai Xuan, for instance, was reputed to have shot down a jet with just 20 bullets. Women were represented not only as warriors but also as workers. They were shown with a rifle in one hand and a hammer in the other. Whether young or old, women began to be depicted as selflessly working and fighting to save the country. As casualties in the war increased in the 1960s, women were urged to join the struggle in larger numbers. Many women responded and joined the resistance movement. They helped in nursing the wounded, constructing underground rooms and tunnels, and fighting the enemy.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
Along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, young volunteers kept open 2,195 kilometers of strategic roads and guarded 2,500 key points. They built 6 airstrips, neutralized tens of thousands of bombs, transported tens of thousands of kilograms of cargo, weapons and food, and shot down 15 planes. Between 1965 and 1975, of the 17,000 youth who worked on the trail, 70 to 80% were women. One military historian argues that there were 1.5 million women in the regular army, the militia, the local forces, and professional teams. Women in times of peace. By the 1970s, as peace talks began to get underway and the end of the war seemed near, women were no longer represented as warriors. Now the image of women as workers begins to predominate. They are shown working in agricultural cooperatives, factories, and production units, rather than as fighters. The end of the war, the prolongation of the war, created strong reactions even within the U.S. It was clear that the U.S. had failed to achieve its objectives. The Vietnamese resistance had not been crushed. The support of the Vietnamese people for U.S. action had not been won. In the meantime, thousands of young U.S. soldiers had lost their lives, and countless Vietnamese civilians had been killed. This was a war that has been called the First Television War. Battle scenes were shown on the daily news programs. Many became disillusioned with what the U.S. was doing, and writers such as Mary McCarthy and actors like Jane Fonda even visited North Vietnam and praised their heroic defense of the country. The scholar Noam Chomsky called the war the greatest threat to peace, to national self-determination, and to international cooperation. The widespread questioning of government policy strengthened moves to negotiate an end to the war. A peace settlement was signed in Paris in January 1974. This ended conflict with the U.S., but fighting between the Saigon regime and the NLF continued. The NLF occupied the presidential palace in Saigon on April 30, 1975, and unified Vietnam.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support. Thank you and happy learning.